Your garden is currently screaming, but you can't hear it. To a passing moth or a hungry beetle, your neatly organized rows of kale and tomatoes aren't just plants, they are glowing neon beacons of chemical data, cutting through the air like a flare in the dark. Imagine a world where you never buy another bottle of neem oil or set a single yellow sticky trap, yet the pests simply forget your garden exists. Most gardeners are locked in an exhausting arms race, fighting a war of attrition with sprays and powders, never realizing they are battling the very laws of biology. We've been taught to see our gardens as a collection of static objects, when in reality they are a complex aromatic radio station. But here, where it gets interesting. In a small lush plot in the English countryside, a gardener named David noticed something that defied conventional wisdom. His cabbages were untouched, while his neighbor's crop, less than 50 feet away, was being decimated by whiteflies. David hadn't used chemicals in a decade. He hadn't used nets. What he had done was create a smellscape so chaotic that the insect's navigation systems simply jammed. He didn't just plant a garden, he built a cloaking device. To understand why this works, we have to look at the world through the eyes, or rather, the antennae of a pest. A cabbage root fly doesn't wander aimlessly. It is a biological machine programmed to detect specific sulfur compounds released by brassicas. It follows a scent trail with the precision of a heat-seeking missile. When we plant a monoculture, a long, beautiful row of nothing but broccoli, we are essentially turning up the volume on that signal until it's deafening. But what happens when that signal hits a wall of interference? That's not the full story. For decades, the agricultural industry has focused on kill rather than confuse. It's a lucrative cycle. The pests arrive, the chemicals are sold, the predators are accidentally wiped out, and the pests return stronger. But by shifting the focus to smell confusion, or what ecologists call associative resistance, we stop the war before the first shot is fired. Think of it like trying to find a single candle in a dark room. Now, imagine someone ignites 100 flashbulbs and fills the air with thick smoke. The candle is still there, but it is effectively invisible. This isn't just about planting flowers near vegetables. It's about a calculated disruption of the insect's landing sequence. Most pests follow a three-step process: find the scent, track the scent, and land on the green surface. If the scent is masked by a stronger, more pungent neighbor like marigolds, onions, or mint, the insect's brain experiences a sensory overload. It can't lock on, it gets frustrated, it moves on to the neighbor's garden. And this changes everything. When we look at the chemistry, the logic becomes undeniable. Plants like Tagetes patula, the humble French marigold, release a compound called alpha-terthionyl. To us, it's just a sharp, earthy smell. To a nematode in the soil or a fly in the air, it's a chemical barrier. When you interleave these masking agents directly into your food rows, you aren't just adding color, you are rewriting the atmospheric data of your backyard. But why isn't this the global standard? Why do we still see endless miles of single-crop fields? The answer is efficiency, but not the kind that benefits you. Large-scale machinery requires uniform rows for harvesting. It demands a predictable, sterile environment where chemicals can be applied by a computer. Biological confusion is messy. It's diverse. It's difficult to harvest with a 20-ton tractor, so the industry ignored it. They traded the resilience of the ecosystem for the convenience of the machine. However, in a home garden, you have the luxury of complexity. You have the power to create a guild. Imagine a tomato plant. On its own, it's a target for aphids. But wrap that tomato in a perimeter of basil and chives, and suddenly the tomato signal is buried under a mountain of aromatic interference. The aphids aren't being repelled by a poison. They simply cannot find the on switch for their feeding behavior. They are standing on the dinner plate, but they think they're in a desert. This leads us to the practical architecture of a confused garden. It starts with the 40-60 rule. To achieve total atmospheric saturation, at least 40% of your planting area must be dedicated to aromatic masking agents. This isn't a border of flowers around the edge that's a common mistake. A border is just a fence they can fly over. You need in-row disruption. You plant a brassica, then a pungent herb, then a flower, then another brassica. You are creating a checkerboard of conflicting data. The most potent combination for this is the triple lock system. First, you use alliums, onions, garlic, or leeks. Their heavy sulfurous oils create a low-lying base note that masks root-level signals. Second, you add the umbellifers, plants like dill, fennel, and parsley. These serve a dual purpose. Their scent confuses the bad guys, but their tiny nectar-rich flowers act as a landing pad for the good guys, the parasitic wasps and hoverflies that act as your garden's standing army. Finally, you introduce the high-note aromatics: mint, lemon balm, or sage. These release volatile organic compounds that travel further in the wind, breaking up the scent trails of flying pests before they even reach your fence line. But there is a catch. If you plant mint directly in the ground, it will take over your garden like a weed. The secret is the sinking method. You grow your most aggressive aromatic maskers in pots, then sink those pots into the soil between your vegetables. You get the atmospheric benefit without the root-level invasion. It's a tactical deployment of scent. As you sit in a garden built this way, you notice a strange silence. There is no frantic buzzing of flies around your greens. There are no holes in your leaves. You begin to realize that the pests were never the problem. The vacuum we created by planting single crops was the problem. We invited them by making it too easy. When you break the pattern, you reclaim your time. You stop being a janitor scrubbing away infestations and start being a conductor of a biological orchestra. The complexity that the industrial world fears becomes your greatest armor. The most sophisticated technology in your garden isn't a new pesticide or a smart irrigation system. It's the invisible cloud of molecules drifting between a tomato and a marigold, whispering a lie to every pest that passes by. We've spent a century trying to kill the messenger, only to realize we could have just scrambled the message. Once you see your garden as a frequency instead of a farm, you can never go back to the old way of fighting. The question is no longer how to kill what eats your food, but how to make sure they never even know it's there. The truth is, the most productive gardens in the world don't look like tidy rows. They look like a beautiful, fragrant riot. If you're ready to stop the war and start the confusion, there is one specific plant combination that acts as a universal reset button for almost any backyard soil. But that's a secret for the next step of the journey. The reset button isn't a single plant, but a biological collision between two specific families, the Brassicaceae and the Tropielum. If you've ever watched your kale disappear overnight to the gluttony of the cabbage white butterfly, you've witnessed a focused biological strike. But when you interplant these crops with nasturtiums, you trigger a phenomenon known as trap cropping on a microscopic scale. The nasturtium is a chemical genius. It produces a scent profile that is actually more attractive to the butterfly than the vegetable itself. It lures the pest away from your food and onto its own sacrificial leaves. But here's the twist. The nasturtium's sap contains high concentrations of mustard oils that act as a natural growth regulator. The pests land, they lay their eggs, and the cycle stops there because the environment is designed to be a dead end. But this is only the ground floor. To truly master the smellscape, you have to understand the time-release factor. Many gardeners plant their aromatic herbs in the spring and wonder why the pests return in August. It's because the chemical output of a plant isn't constant. It peaks and valleys based on heat and light. To maintain a permanent cloak, you must stagger your aromatics. While your sage provides a steady, woody baseline of protection in the early cool months, your basil and oregano need to be hitting their aromatic peak just as the summer heat begins to vaporize the protective oils of other plants. This is the hidden architecture of a self-defending system. We often think of organic as simply the absence of chemicals, but true organic gardening is the presence of an active, invisible defense grid. You aren't just growing food, you are managing a chemical airspace. When you walk through a garden designed this way, the air feels heavy, complex, and vibrant. It's a sensory overload that signals danger or confusion to a pest, but signals home to you. The transition from a defensive mindset to a design mindset is the moment a hobby becomes a craft. You stop looking for holes in leaves and start looking for gaps in the fragrance. You realize that the most powerful tool you own isn't a shovel or a sprayer, it's your nose. And once you learn to tune the radio stations of your soil, the garden finally stops screaming and starts to breathe. What if the most resilient part of your garden isn't what you harvest, but the invisible layers you never touch? The reset button isn't a single plant, but a biological collision between two specific families, the Brassicaceae and the Tropielum. If you've ever watched your kale disappear overnight to the gluttony of the cabbage white butterfly, you've witnessed a focused biological strike. But when you interplant these crops with nasturtiums, you trigger a phenomenon known as trap cropping on a microscopic scale. The nasturtium is a chemical genius. It produces a scent profile that is actually more attractive to the butterfly than the vegetable itself. It lures the pest away from your food and onto its own sacrificial leaves. But here's the twist. The nasturtium's sap contains high concentrations of mustard oils that act as a natural growth regulator. The pests land, they lay their eggs, and the cycle stops there because the environment is designed to be a dead end. But this is only the ground floor. To truly master the smellscape, you have to understand the time-release factor. Many gardeners plant their aromatic herbs in the spring and wonder why the pests return in August. It's because the chemical output of a plant isn't constant. It peaks and valleys based on heat and light. To maintain a permanent cloak, you must stagger your aromatics. While your sage provides a steady, woody baseline of protection in the early cool months, your basil and oregano need to be hitting their aromatic peak just as the summer heat begins to vaporize the protective oils of other plants. This is the hidden architecture of a self-defending system. We often think of organic as simply the absence of chemicals, but true organic gardening is the presence of an active, invisible defense grid. You aren't just growing food, you are managing a chemical airspace. When you walk through a garden designed this way, the air feels heavy, complex, and vibrant. It's a sensory overload that signals danger or confusion to a pest, but signals home to you. The transition from a defensive mindset to a design mindset is the moment a hobby becomes a craft. You stop looking for holes in leaves and start looking for gaps in the fragrance. You realize that the most powerful tool you own isn't a shovel or a sprayer, it's your nose. And once you learn to tune the radio stations of your soil, the garden finally stops screaming and starts to breathe. What if the most resilient part of your garden isn't what you harvest, but the invisible layers you never touch? Would you like to explore the specific, triple lock layout for a standard raised bed? To deploy the triple lock layout, you have to stop thinking in rows and start thinking in cells. Imagine a standard 4x8 raised bed. In a traditional garden, this would be a landing strip for aphids. But in the cloaked garden, we divide this space into a high-interference grid that disrupts every stage of the insect landing sequence. At the center of the bed, you place your vulnerables, the tomatoes, peppers, or kale. These are the high-value targets. Surrounding them in a tight diamond pattern are the primary disruptors, garlic and chives. These aren't just plants, they're chemical landmines. Because their root systems are narrow, you can tuck them directly against the stalks of your vegetables. This creates a basal shield, masking the scent of the soil and the plant's base before a pest even crawls upward. But here, where it gets interesting. Along the edges of the bed, you install the airborne scramblers, French marigolds and sweet alyssum. The marigolds pump out thiophene to keep the soil clean, while the alyssum produces a heavy, honey-sweet scent that acts as a beacon for beneficial insects. You are essentially setting up a border patrol that works 24 hours a day. That's not the full story, though. The final lock is the vertical interference. By placing tall aromatic herbs like dill or fennel at the corners, you create scent chimneys. As the wind hits your garden, these taller plants catch the breeze first, mixing their oils into the air and casting a shadow of confusion over the entire bed. A moth flying 20 feet away doesn't smell a tomato, it smells a confusing, unappetizing soup of dill and marigold. This isn't just gardening, it's atmospheric engineering. We've been sold a lie that nature is something we have to conquer with chemistry. We've been told that a clean garden is a successful one, but the truth is exactly the opposite. A clean garden is a vulnerable garden. A messy, aromatic, complex system is the most sophisticated piece of technology on the planet. When you step back and look at your plot, you won't see a battleground. You'll see a system in balance, a place where the insects are so busy being confused that they forget to be hungry. You've moved beyond the need for sprays because you've changed the very definition of what your garden is. It's no longer a target, it's a ghost in the machine. True mastery of the earth doesn't come from the strength of your chemicals, but from the depth of your understanding of its invisible signals. Does your current garden layout invite guests, or does it whisper a warning they can't ignore? To truly cement this system, you must implement the saturation threshold. Most people fail because they treat companion planting like a garnish, a single marigold at the end of a 10-foot row of beans. This is like trying to hide the scent of a landfill with a single sprig of lavender. The math simply doesn't work. To reach total cloaking, your garden needs to hit a VOC, volatile organic compound, density that overwhelms the local insect population. This is achieved through understory interleaving. Instead of leaving bare soil which acts as a visual and thermal target, for pests you carpet the ground beneath your tall crops with living mulch. Think of a forest floor. It is never bare. By planting low-growing, aromatic creepers like creeping thyme or winter savory under your peppers and tomatoes, you are closing the final gap in the defense grid. These plants regulate soil temperature, prevent erosion, and most importantly, they release a constant ground fog of repellent oils every time they are brushed by the wind or a passing animal. But here, where it gets interesting. This high-density planting creates a microclimate that benefits the plants just as much as it confuses the pests. The humidity trapped under this aromatic canopy prevents the soil from crusting, allowing your primary crops to focus all their energy on fruit production rather than survival. You aren't just saving money on sprays, you are reducing your water bill and your weeding time simultaneously. And this changes everything. The modern agricultural complex relies on the vacuum model: strip the land, plant one thing, and fight everything else that tries to enter. But you are moving to the full spectrum model. You are building a community where every square inch is performing a biological task. This isn't a theory that requires a laboratory. It is a logic that has existed for millennia, hidden under the noise of industrial convenience. By reintroducing scent chaos, you aren't fighting nature. You are finally letting it do the heavy lifting for you. When you stand in your garden at dusk, and the air is thick with the scent of mint, tomato leaf, and damp earth, you'll realize you haven't just grown a garden. You've built a sanctuary that exists on a frequency the rest of the world has forgotten. The most powerful thing you can do for your soil is to step back and let the invisible chemistry take over. What happens when you stop being the gardener and start being the architect of the air? The war for your garden doesn't end with a white flag, it ends with a disappearing act. For decades, we have been conditioned to believe that a beautiful garden is a silent, sterile one, a series of isolated plants waiting for our intervention. We have spent billions on chemicals to solve a problem that our own desire for order created in the first place. But as we've seen, the most effective defense isn't a wall, it's a whisper. By embracing the chaos of smell confusion, you are stepping out of the cycle of reaction and into a state of prevention. You are no longer the soldier on the front lines, frantically spraying at every shadow. Instead, you are the ghost in the garden, invisible to the very creatures that seek to destroy your hard work. You've replaced the toxic spray with a symphony of scent, and in doing so, you've turned your backyard into an ecosystem that can finally think for itself. But here is the final realization. This trick doesn't just protect your vegetables, it restores your relationship with the earth. When you stop seeing insects as enemies to be eradicated and start seeing them as biological signals to be managed, the stress of gardening evaporates. You begin to appreciate the marigold not just for its color, but for its chemistry. You value the mint not just for its flavor, but for its frequency. You realize that the most productive gardens aren't the ones that are the most controlled, but the ones that are the most alive. That's the hidden truth of the smellscape. The industrial world wants you to believe that nature is a problem to be solved with a credit card, but the soil knows better. It knows that diversity is strength, that scent is data, and that a garden that confuses its enemies is a garden that feeds its friends. You have the blueprints now. You have the triple lock layout, the saturation threshold, and the reset button. The air in your garden is waiting to be rewritten. As you look at your plot tonight, ask yourself, is your garden a loud, vulnerable target, or is it ready to become a masterpiece of invisible defense? What if the secret to your best harvest ever isn't something you add to the soil, but a message you send through the air?